Tech and clips.
Yeah. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So how the Beach Boys changed music. Yes, I've done a couple of reactions to the Beach Boys. I love their music, they are something else, but I don't really know the background story. Hopefully this video is going to give me that. Shout out to the Beat Goes On Matt Beat for all these insightful videos. So yeah, guys, let's dig right in.
Hawthorne, California, 1954. 12-year-old Brian Wilson begins teaching himself how to play the piano and the accordion. Soon, he's writing his own songs and teaching his two younger brothers, Dennis and Carl, to harmonize with him to perform the songs. 4 years later, when Brian was now 16 years old, he formed a band. Brian played piano and sang. His brother Carl, now 11 years old, played guitar, and their neighbor, David Marks, also eventually joined them on guitar. Brian and Carl's parents were very supportive of the band. Their dad, Murray Wilson, was a musician and songwriter himself. Soon they were also making songs with Brian and Carl's cousin, Mike Love. They were heavily influenced by the songwriting of Chuck Berry and the harmonies of the Four Freshmen. Soon Brian's friend and football teammate, Al Jardine, joined the band to play bass, and eventually Brian's other brother, Dennis, finally agreed to join the band as well, learning to play drums. They called themselves the Pendletones, a pun on a type of shirt called Pendletons. Murray Wilson saw lots of potential with his son's band and became their first manager. Dennis, who was really into surfing himself, talked the band into writing multiple songs about surfing and Southern California beach life. Notably, Brian wrote a song called Surfin', which indeed had the word surfin' in it at least 37 times. Murray got his publisher, Height Morgan, and Height's wife, Dorinda, to listen to the song. They loved it and recorded a demo for the band on September 15th, 1961. Height sent the demo to a bunch of record labels. Herb Newman of the small label Candix Records also loved it, signing the band to a record deal and releasing Surfin' as a single on November 27th, 1961. The song was a minor hit, especially on the West Coast, peaking at number 75 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Okay. Despite this immediate success, Newman still had issues with the name of the band. He didn't think the Pendletones would stand out enough. Newman's colleague, Russ Regan, suggested that they change their name to the Beach Boys. Newman agreed. The Beach Boys played their first official live show on December 23rd, 1961 during the intermission of a Dick Dale concert. They performed just 2 songs, and according to multiple accounts, it was a disaster. Their first paying gig on New Year's Eve 1961 went a bit better, and the band would greatly improve their live performances throughout the next year, often wearing heavy wool shirts at shows, like all the cool SoCal surfers. Still, Jardine wasn't happy with how things were going and left the band in February 1962. Ugh, bad timing. On April 19th, 1962, the band, now a 5-piece, recorded another surfing song called Surfin Safari. This song got the attention of Capitol Records, who signed the Beach Boys to a 7-year deal. It released Surfin Safari on June 4th, 1962, and it was an even bigger hit, eventually peaking at number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100. By the time the band recorded what would become their debut studio album, the Beach Boys were already becoming famous across the country. Various songwriters helped the band out. A dude named Nick Vinay produced, but Brian and Mike were often over his shoulder, and he was like, what are you guys doing? Capitol released that debut studio album, Surfin Safari, on October 1st, 1962. In addition to the title track and aforementioned Surfin', the album featured the hits 409 and 10 Little Indians. Unlike most rock albums of the time, Surfin Safari actually featured mostly original songs, most of them written by Brian and Mike. Capitol marketed the Beach Boys, of course, as, quote, surf surf music. And yet, most surf music of the time was instrumental. And so when the Beach Boys performed in 1962, most Southern California audiences were confused when the Beach Boys started singing a bunch. In fact, some of those audiences reportedly threw vegetables at the band in frustration after they started singing their harmonies and stuff. The Beach Boys quickly returned to the studio to record what became their second studio album, Surfin' USA, released by Capitol on March 25th, 1963. Although Vinay still technically produced, Brian Wilson was even more involved with the production this time, around crafting the songs. I imagine Vinay was like, dude, what are you doing? The title track, their third straight hit about surfing that even had surfin' in the title, got up to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and even topped charts around the world. Surfin' USA was not only a commercial success, but critics also praised it. By this time, Brian had developed an affection for double tracking his vocals and adding a bunch of reverb to everything. By the summer of 1963, the Beach Boys were already household names, regularly appearing on the television. However, there were already tensions. Dennis Wilson was consuming too many drugs. Brian Wilson hated performing live. And Murray Wilson, still the band's manager, was way too strict and controlling of the band to capitalize on the surf rock craze that they helped fuel. The Beach Boys quickly followed up Surfin' USA with Surfer Girl, their third studio album, released by Capitol on September 16th, 1963. This was their first album in which Brian Wilson got credit as the producer. Surfer Girl got up to number 7 on the US Billboard 200 and featured the hits Little Deuce Coupe, In My Room, and the title track, of course. After this album, Brian became highly sought after to write and produce pop songs for various other musicians. Capitol released the band's 4th album, Little Deuce Coupe, on October 7th, 1963. It notably featured the hits Be True to Your School, Shut Down, and Spirit of America. Little Deuce Coupe was the first Beach Boys album to sell more than 1 million copies. In December, the band released a Christmas song called Little Saint Nick. That was a big hit and is still played a lot around Christmas time these days. Around the time of the release of Little Deuce Coupe, David Marks left the band to focus on his own band, The Marksmen. He was not getting along with Murray Wilson anyway. Murray even supposedly threatened radio DJs to prevent them from playing music by The Marksmen. Ugh. Well, Murray's behavior only got worse after this, and by early 1964, he was no longer the Beach Boys' manager. Brian and Carl would later claim he was an abusive father who was especially hard on Dennis. Meanwhile, Al Jardine rejoined the band to take Mark's place, and boy, was that actually good timing. You see, by the end of 1964, Brian was done touring with the Beach Boys, and so Jardine would end up taking a much more prominent role as the lead singer during live shows. A rising country singer named Glenn Campbell would also sing Brian's parts. By this time, the band was touring worldwide, by the way. With Brian now just in the studio, he had an extremely productive couple of years. 1964 saw the band releasing 3 studio albums, 1 EP, and their first live album. Everything they released was a hit, man. Capitol released Shut Down Volume 2, their 5th studio album, on March 2nd. It featured the hits Don't Worry Baby and Fun Fun Fun, which today is still one of the band's most recognizable songs. All Summer Long, their 6th studio album, released by Capitol on July 13th, featured another huge hit for the band, I Get Around. It was the band's first #1 hit, topping the pop charts in both the United States and Canada. Capitol released the Beach Boys' Christmas album, yeah, that was the name of it, on November 9th, 1964. It was technically their 7th studio album. Wilson went big with the arrangements on this one, getting a 41-piece orchestra to bring his and Mike's songs to life. 1964 was also around the time of the British invasion, a time when a bunch of bands bands from the United Kingdom became really popular in the United States. Brian Wilson was a fan of all these British bands and their new exciting sound. He especially began to admire the work of the Beatles to a point where he became almost obsessed with trying to create better songs than them. He also was having some personal issues and taking too many drugs by this point, which, okay, sure. Some say that's often a good recipe for good art, but I digress. One thing was for sure. He was done writing songs about surfing, man, but he wasn't done with the orchestra. In the final months of 1964 and into 1965, Brian and Mike put together their most ambitious album yet.
Yes.
It featured dense and complex arrangements, longer songs, more sentimental lyrics, and a ridiculously diverse range of instruments. Everything from harpsichords to vibraphones to French horns. What resulted was the band's 8th studio album, The Beach Boys Today, released by Capitol on March 8th, 1965. The Beach Boys Today feature the singles When I Grow Up to Be a Man, Dance, 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 their cover of Do You Want to Dance, and Help Me Rhonda, which notably featured Al Jardine on lead vocals. Help Me Rhonda was another #1 hit for the band. The Beach Boys Today is, today still considered one of their best albums and one of the greatest albums of all time.
Okay.
Around that time, Bruce Johnston began singing Brian's parts at live shows.
Whoa.
He'd also begin recording with the band, eventually becoming a permanent member of the band. On July 5th, 1965, Capitol released the band's 9th studio album, Summer Days and Summer Nights. This one featured yet another huge hit for the band, California Girls. Summer Days and Summer Nights got all the way up to #4 on the UK albums chart and #2 on the US Billboard 200 chart. The Beach Boys followed up Summer Days and Summer Nights with Beach Boys Party, their 10th studio album, released by Capitol on November 8th, 1965. Beach Boys Party was more stripped down and featured more covers, but did feature another smash hit, Barbara Ann. Indeed, by this time, the Beach Boys were arguably the most popular band in the country. That said, the Beatles were right behind them and threatening to take the throne. Brian Wilson knew he had to be more ambitious, especially after he heard the Beatles' latest record, Rubber Soul. And boy, was he more ambitious.
Yeah.
His goal was literally to make the greatest rock album ever made. While his bandmates toured, Brian spent months crafting new songs, many of them with his new friend, Tony Asher. After the band returned to the studio to begin recording the new songs, Wilson aimed for Phil Spector's famous Wall of Sound music production formula to create a rich and deep sound using weird instruments like bicycle bells and soda cans, mixing pop, jazz, avant-garde, and even classical music. The new songs made up what is now considered to be a classic. Easily one of the greatest and most influential albums of all time. Yep, Pet Sounds. Capitol released Pet Sounds, their 11th studio album, on May 16th, 1966. There was definitely no filler on this album. While every song was basically a masterpiece, Pet Sounds featured the hits Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows, and Sloop John B. The album definitely caught some fans off guard, being a bit more artsy-fartsy. Capitol even promoted it as, quote, the most progressive pop album ever. Pet Sounds was one of the first concept albums, meaning it was meant to be listened to as a whole. Brian Wilson followed up Pet Sounds, spending tens of thousands of dollars and more than 90 hours of recording time putting together one song, often considered the definitive Beach Boys song, Good Vibrations. Indeed, at the time, it was the most expensive single ever recorded. But I I'd say it was worth it. Music critics often list it as one of the greatest songs of all time.
Yeah.
Good Vibrations ended up being a counterculture anthem for the rest of the decade. Despite being incredibly complicated, it reached the top of the pop charts in multiple countries, including, yep, the United States. Meanwhile, Brian had headed back to the studio to follow up Pet Sounds with an even more ambitious concept album, Smile. He worked with a dude named Van Dyke Parks this time, writing the songs. Brian wanted these new songs to encapsulate strictly American culture as a way to distinguish it from the aforementioned British invasion.
Okay.
Recording was slow going. By 1967, music media outlets were hyping it up, but long story short, it would not be coming out in 1967. Brian simply wasn't satisfied with it. Plus, he was going through some mental health issues anyway. Add to that a growing number of issues the band was having with Capitol Records, and the band would shelve Smile for many years. In the following decades, fans constantly gossiped about the mysterious Smile, hoping and praying that one day they'd be able to hear the new masterpiece. Instead of Smile, we got Smiley Smile, often considered a watered-down version of Smile. Capitol released Smiley Smile, man, what a name that is, officially their 12th studio album on September 18th, 1967. Smiley Smile was the Beach Boys' first flop. Critics and fans were both underwhelmed by the album, although it did feature two singles, Heroes and Villains and Getting Hungry. It was obvious Brian Wilson had a diminished role on Smiley Smile. Instead, Carl Wilson and Mike Love once again took a more active role in the writing and recording process, and this was the trend moving forward. The band followed up Smiley Smile with Wild Honey, their 13th studio album, released by Capitol on December 18th, 1967. Wild Honey was the first Beach Boys album, obviously influenced by soul and R&B, though it also featured two singles, Darlin' and the title track. Wild Honey was yet another commercial and critical flop. After meeting Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and hanging out with celebrities in India for a while, Mike was influenced to create many of the songs that ended up making the band's 14th studio album, Friends, released by Capitol on June 24th, 1968. Friends was the worst performing Beach Boys album up to that point. Around the time of its release, Brian Wilson got admitted to a psychiatric hospital. He had been using heavier drugs, and his mental health had been steadily declining. After this, Brian had little involvement with the band at all. This was definitely a low point in Beach Boys history. By the end of 1968, critics were generally now all talking trash about them, as popular music had generally gotten heavier and gloomier as the counterculture movement had hit the mainstream. They were also running out of money. Heck, Dennis Wilson was hanging out with Charles Manson at this time? Yes. That Charles Manson, after he and some of his cult members murdered some folks. The Beach Boys got some bad press for Dennis's association, to say the least. Despite all this, Carl and Dennis gathered outtakes Brian had previously recorded and scrounged up new material, which ultimately made up the band's 15th studio album, 2020, released by Capitol on February 19th, 1969. 2020 saw the band attempting to return to their older sound. Heck, Capitol was still marketing them as surfer rock. Anyway, 2020 featured two standout singles, Do It Again and Bluebirds Over the Mountain. Throughout 1969, Brian returned to record with the band. After Capitol Records ditched them, they eventually signed with Reprise Records. In late 1969, Murray Wilson sold the band's publishing rights against the band's wishes for $700,000, or around $6 million in today's money. Yeah, the band got ripped off. Eventually, those publishing rights earned more than $100 million in royalties. By the spring of 1970, the Beach Boys had recorded more than 30 new songs. Some of these made up what became their 16th studio album, Sunflower, released by Reprise on August 31st, 1970. While critics mostly praised Sunflower, this failed failed to translate to much radio airplay or commercial success. Still, the album featured 4 singles: Add Some Music to Your Day, Slip On Through, Tears in the Morning, and Cool Cool Water. One of the coolest things about Sunflower was that literally every band member played a significant role in the writing, recording, and production process. The album remains a die-hard fan favorite. While promoting Sunflower, the band got Jack Riley as their new manager, who undoubtedly got the band back on track. The Beach Boys' 17th album, Surf's Up, which Reprise released on August 30th, 1971, was their most commercially successful album since Smiley Smile. I still can't believe that album's called Smiley Smile. Many critics loved it, calling it a comeback album. The lyrics were about serious stuff, and it was clear the band was trying to evolve their sound. Indeed, it doesn't sound much like their other albums. Surf's Up had 2 hits, the title track and Long Promised Road. That said, Brian was not as involved with the recording of the album. In March 1972, Bruce Johnston left the Beach Boys, and the band recruited not 1, but 2 members to take his place for live performances: Ricky Fattar and Blondie Chaplin. 2 dudes from South Africa who both played in a band called The Flames took his place. On May 15th, 1972, Reprise released the band's 18th studio album, Carl and the Passions, So Tough, the first to feature Fattar and Chaplin. The album featured 2 singles, You Need a Mess of Help to Stand Alone and Marcella. Yeah, Carl and the Passions, So Tough was another flop. The band spent the summer in a barn in Holland. Brian, who by that time was barely contributing to the band, even showed up. They wrote and recorded a bunch of new songs. This stuff ultimately made up the band's 19th studio album called, you guessed it, Holland, released by Reprise on January 8th, 1973. Critics praised Holland, and even today it's considered one of the best Beach Boys albums. It even did better commercially, peaking at number 36 on the Billboard 200 chart, and had 2 hit songs, Sail On, Sailor, and California Saga. Murray Wilson died on June 4th, 1973, and the band took a break from recording. Brian had a particularly rough time after his death. His health went into further decline, and he became very reclusive. By the end of the year, Riley was no longer their manager, and Fattar and Chaplin had left the band. Jump ahead to June 24th, 1974. It's the day Capitol released Endless Summer, a greatest hits album that ended up being a surprise success. It sold 3 million copies and became their second #1 album in both the United States and Canada. This breathed new life into the band. Well, at least this motivated them to go on tour again. By the end of the year, they were selling out arenas. To take advantage of their renewed popularity, the band released multiple compilation albums and returned to the studio. Brian Wilson even returned to take the lead producing. The Beach Boys busted out the synthesizers and got experimental again. That said, recording was kind of sloppy. On July 5th, 1976, Reprise released the band's 20th studio album, 15 Big Ones. It got mostly mixed reviews from critics, but did feature 2 hits, Rock and Roll Music, which got up to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and It's Okay. 15 Big Ones also got up to number 8 on the Billboard 200. Incredibly, it was their biggest selling album of new songs since Beach Boys Party. On August 5th, 1976, NBC premiered The Beach Boys' It's Okay, a TV special featuring the band, produced by Saturday Night Live producer Lorne Michaels. Meanwhile, Brian's back. Yep, Brian had cleaned up his act and was once again performing live with the band. It was the first time he had since 1964, yo. That said, he seemed a bit awkward on stage. The band was also back in the studio with Brian, producing once again began for the rest of 1976 and into 1977. Brian wrote most of the new stuff and performed almost every single instrument. What resulted was The Beach Boys' Love You, the band's 21st studio album, released by Reprise on April 11th, 1977. But the magic seemed to be gone. Although some music historians later said this album gave us a preview of synth pop and new wave, The Beach Boys' Love You got little love in return from both fans and critics alike. After this, the Wilson brothers recorded a new album that became known as Adult Child, but Mike and Al were like, nah guys, this music is just too strange. Ultimately, the Beach Boys scrapped the album, and to this day, Adult Child is officially unreleased. Although, if you look for it, there are bootlegs of it all around the internet. Honestly, it just sounds like a typical indie record from the 2000s. It's great. Anyway, without a follow-up to The Beach Boys' Love You, the band canceled their planned European tour. Before that, the band was playing some of their biggest shows ever, but this kind of sucked the life out of them. Plus, the band wasn't getting along. Mostly, there was a major rift between Carl and Dennis on one side and Al and Mike on the other. Despite things unraveling, the band kept playing shows as it was hard to resist the money. By that point, Bruce Johnston had rejoined the band. Oh yeah, plus they still owed Reprise Records another studio album. That album ended up being the band's 22nd. Reprise released MIU album on September 25th, 1978. Carl and Dennis barely contributed to it at all. It's widely considered to be one of the band's worst albums, and it was another flop. Although their cover of Come Go With Me ended up being a hit later on. After MIU album, CBS Records agreed to release their 23rd studio album, LA, or Light Album, released on March 16th, 1979. It was another flop, although Lady Linda was a notable hit off of it. By 1980, things were still not going well with the band. The three Wilson brothers had drifted pretty far away from Al and Mike. Well, heck, Brian had drifted pretty far away from just about everyone by that point. He had gained weight. Both Brian and Dennis were doing more drugs than they ever had before. Despite this, the Beach Boys managed to record their 24th studio album, Keeping the Summer Alive, released by CBS on March 24th, 1980. Jump ahead to November 5th, 1982, and the Beach Boys kicked Brian Wilson out of the band as they worried he was killing himself. Brian spent the next couple years on a strict diet and going through intense therapy sessions. The next year, Dennis Wilson finally checked into rehab to try to get sober, but kept relapsing. On December 28th, 1983, after drinking alcohol all day, he drowned off the coast of Marina del Rey. He was just 39 years old. Despite the absence of Brian and the death of Dennis, the Beach Boys continued to play shows. They went through various drummers, notably this dude. John Stamos has stepped in to play drums with them over the years. Yep, the actor. Stamos later got them featured on multiple episodes of Full House. The Beach Boys returned to the studio in 1984 into 1985 with producer Steve Levine to record what became their self-titled album. Brian even reunited with the band for some of the recordings. By then, he was having a blossoming solo career. CBS released their self-titled album on June 10th, 1985. It was their 25th studio album. Unfortunately, it was also a big flop. Yeah, it's all good. By now, the Beach Boys were living legends. On January 20th, 1988, they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. However, during the acceptance speech, Mike embarrassed the band by randomly talking trash about other respected musicians. Still, the band remained determined to move forward, although they also seemed to be deliberately leaving Brian behind. He also had little involvement on the band's next album, Still Cruisin', released on August 28th, 1989 by Capitol Records once again. Still Cruisin' was surprisingly a commercial success. The album's lead single, Kokomo, was on all kinds of soundtracks and was their fourth and final song to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Still Cruisin' went on to sell more than 1 million copies. By the early 1990s, though, the Beach Boys were were having a difficult time reaching younger audiences, and now Brian Wilson was completely cut off from the band, as Mike had sued him for defamation in response to what Brian wrote about him in his memoir, Wouldn't It Be Nice, My Own Story. After the publisher settled that suit, Mike sued him again for not giving him the rights and royalties for helping write Beach Boys songs for decades. Mike did win $5 million and a share of future royalties from Wilson in that suit. Perhaps distracted by these legal fights, the band returned to the studio to record their most underwhelming stuff yet. What resulted ended up being their 27th studio album, Summer in Paradise, released by Brother Records on August 3rd, 1992, and their 28th studio album, Stars and Stripes Volume 1, released by River North Records on August 19th, 1996. Both were so bad that you can barely find any copies of them in existence today. In 1997, Carl Wilson got diagnosed with lung and brain cancer. Despite the diagnosis, he continued to perform with the band, having to sit down and get oxygen in between songs. The chemotherapy treatment did not get rid of his cancers. Carl died on February 6, 1998. He was just 51. After his death, Al left the band, and the rest of the Beach Boys took a break. Meanwhile, Brian was going through a renaissance in his career. He was playing tons of shows and even got around to finishing Smile, the aforementioned masterpiece that got shelved by the Beach Boys back in 1967. On September 28, 2004, None Such Records released Brian Wilson Presents Smile. Critics universally praised it, and it further proved just how much of an innovative musician Brian was. Meanwhile, Al was going around performing with a new band he called Beach Boys, Family and Friends, but got himself into legal issues as he was using the name of the band without a license. Oops. Al sued Mike at one point. Al got sued. What a mess. A few years later, Mike, Al, and Brian all seemingly settled their past legal differences to begin collaborating again. Oh, you know who else was back? David Marks. In 2012, the Beach Boys, featuring Brian, Mike, Al, David, and Bruce Johnston, reunited not only for a 50th anniversary tour, but also a new album. That new album, That's Why God Made the Radio, released by Capitol Records on June 5th, 2012. Their 29th and most recent studio album, it was produced mostly by Brian. The title track was a hit, and the album got all the way up to number 3 on the Billboard 200. Their highest charting studio album since 1965. That's Why God Made the Radio introduced a whole new generation to the Beach Boys. Brian went on to perform solo shows until 2022, but was forced into retirement due to ongoing health concerns. He and Mike Love have continued to not get along. Flash forward to today, and Mike still has the Beach Boys together without Brian Wilson, of course. They are still regularly performing. More than 60 musicians have been at least touring members of the band at some point. The Beach Boys are one of the most praised and commercially successful bands of all time. According to Chartmasters, they are the 32nd highest selling music acts of all time, selling more than 128 million albums worldwide. Holy dang. In total, they have released 29 studio albums, 11 live albums, and 56 compilation albums. They've had at least 80 hit songs. They're also one of the most influential bands. A surprising number of bands wouldn't probably even exist today if not for the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson, in particular, continues to be recognized as basically a musical genius. One of the most innovative and creative dudes in history. The Beach Boys changed pop music forever, making it more youth-oriented and reaching broader audiences than ever before imagined. If you've ever heard a jingle in a commercial, you can thank the Beach Boys, or perhaps curse them, for that jingle being stuck in your head all day. Because you see, every song they made was basically as catchy as a jingle. They made harmonies cool. They made sweet melodies hip. Their songs continue to make tens of millions of people smile.
True. Wow.
Okay, so everybody's favorite Beach Boys album is probably Pet Sounds, as it should be. But what's your favorite Beach Boys song? Also, which bands should I cover next for this series? Please let me know down below. Thanks for watching and listening. From here on out, I hope that you have good vibrations.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So yeah, that was how the Beach Boys changed music. Shout outs to the Beat Goes on this channel. Bringing us all these insightful videos. Yeah. I mean, as a music enthusiast, as a music reactor, I have to say, I always appreciate content that not only celebrates iconic artists, but also educates us on what made them so impactful. And this video does exactly exactly that. With the Beach Boys, the video gives a lot of credit on the Beach Boys tight harmonies, and rightfully so. When you hear those layered vocals, especially in the tracks like God Only Knows and Don't Worry Baby, it's so clear. They were not just riding the wave of 60s pop. They were redefining what vocal arrangements could sound like in mainstream music. Their harmonies, definitely a blend of purity and complexity, and this video really highlights how Brian Wilson pushed those vocal textures to an entirely new level. Instrumentation, the Beach Boys, their instrumentation and then their studio innovation. That part of the video really stood out to me. The Beach Boys to me didn't just play surf rock. They experimented with orchestras, theremins, tape splicing and layer production long before it was popular. Good Vibrations, this song I've heard, I've reacted to it. To me, it wasn't just a hit. Definitely felt like an audio experiment. This video really makes you realize how much Brian Wilson was ahead of his time, turning the studio into his own instrument. For a modern audience, it's almost mind-blowing how advanced those techniques were in the 60s. Yes, one of the most powerful points this video made is about the emotional depth in their songwriting, especially on Pet Sounds. Songs like wouldn't it be nice and God Only Knows, to me didn't just sound pretty. They taped into real feelings of hope, insecurity and love. That really makes their music timeless. To me, this wasn't their music wasn't just beach music. This video definitely highlighted all of that and helped you as a watcher, as a listener, to see how the Beach Boys evolved from catchy radio hits into emotionally deep, sonically daring artists, who influenced everyone, from the Beatles, to modern pop bands. Guys, this video is definitely a must watch. I love that. It's thoughtful, it's well placed, and gives real context to the Beach Boys journey from surf pop stars to studio legends. Yes. So let me know what you think about this one down in the comment section. Let me know. If you want me to do more content such as this one, I'll definitely be here to do just that. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. On to the next reaction. Take care. Stay safe. Peace out.